Okay, everybody, good evening. Merry Christmas, I'll say, just to get out the way, you know what I mean? And welcome to the meeting. You've got one substantial, I would suggest one substantial item on the agenda, but we'll come to that to item 6. First, I've got apologies. Hopefully, William's got a list, save him to read them all out. There is a few.
I do, Chair. We have had apologies from Councillor Yates, Councillor Whitehouse, Councillor Trent, and Councillor Holland.
Okay, those accepted? Yeah, you can't vote anyway, so accept them anyway. Unless somebody sees them shopping somewhere when they should be here. Yeah, you've got to be careful with CCTV these days. Next item on the agenda is declarations of interest. Planning protocol, we've all got an interest in that, but not in the way that is it one that you need to raise. Anybody got any interests? Are we still? Yeah. Okay. So the next item then is the minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on the 30th of November. As you all wish to, those signed or agreed? Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Any other minutes? No, that was it, wasn't it? Because it's the committee we're looking at. So the next item then, item 4, is health matters. And I know members want to raise a few items on here. Sorry, this is very thick paper that the council seem to be able to afford. I can't afford 100 grams paper, but there you are. Anybody got any questions on page 1? The items 1 to 7. Not then 1 to 7? We did that before the meeting, but carry
on. Chair, I believe it's at the end of the work programme. There was the meeting of the.
So whereabouts are you? Sorry,
27th of November, page 7.
Oh, right.
Sorry, I'm jumping ahead, aren't I? Page 1 to 7.
Yeah, you are a bit. We're on July here. Okay, so the next page is items 8 to 15, and I think Councillor Booker, Claire, has got a item number 13. Want to raise an issue there?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a couple. At the last meeting, we asked for clarification, and I'm wondering if we've had that about the ticks on the side. I've got a couple of questions which I'll put to our member to respond to. The reason I'm drawing item 13 as an example, not because I've got anything about the content, but as an example. In there it says the Cabinet Member for Health and Care has been requested for an executive response to the following recommendations by the 10th of November. There's a specific item there asking for a specific executive response by a date, and it's not ticked, which is why I'm trying to understand the process of how this works with those ticks and what it means. 2 more items just to raise for you to respond to. I'd be very interested to hear about item 16. Sorry, it's on the next page. Excuse me, that was that page.
Yeah, go 13. Do you know, Leona, Councillor Leona, if you know whether there's been a response from the Cabinet Member for Health and Care? You'll find out. Okay, thank you. If I can't go to 16 then on the next page, yeah. That's the meeting of the 13th of November.
Continue.
Sorry? Yes. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Item 16 then. I'd be very interested to hear about this meeting and a little bit more about that, because I know the Staffordshire Falls trial is quite a significant one, and it's a really good use of resources on the fire and rescue teams taking and supporting the ambulance crews. And then the meetings on the 20th of November and 27th of November are blank, and it doesn't look like there's any outcomes actions next to it. And I'm just wondering again, what was the outcome of those 2, because they were back in November and there's nothing listed. Thank you.
Again, are you able to help Leona?
Yeah. So 13th, that one, I have sent my apologies for that one. But regards to again, those items, I can look into that for you. When you mentioned about ticks in last meeting, I have asked about that as well. It's like when actions have been completed. For example, if we look at number 1, for example, that's like the most obvious one is finding delivery of orthodontics. That I've been informed that does take quite a longer period regards to that. So that hasn't been ticked yet. But for example, like the winter plan surge, that surge plan we mentioned in last one. So I have an email regards to that, so which I will share with everyone here as well.
Okay.
So once after this meeting, I can share with everyone this week on that.
Okay. Do you want to say anything else, Claire?
Um,
See what's coming in there. But,
Specifically, item 13 had a date with an executive decision, so that's why I raised that one.
no, she's going to find. You
And
can find out. Yeah.
a bit more information about the Falls trial, Solly, that was on the meeting on the 13th of November.
Oh yeah, that's six.
Number 16, isn't it?
16. Yeah, with establishing fire and rescue getting involved as opposed to using.
Unfortunately, as I said, I was away for that one. I did send my apologies, but again, I'm waiting for update for that in regards to the minutes of that from the officer as well. And also for 27th and 20th, which was blank, we are waiting for, again, it's published on the county council health website where the minutes, which are published after, that's not published yet. So we're still waiting for those.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'm happy to update on the 27th, which I will be doing after on that.
Okay. Claire, if you the same issue, but say so.
Yeah, I just want to note my disappointment that our representative doesn't know about the trials. You can go and refresh yourselves on the meetings that you miss. This is a really important trial that is making better use of resources. It's sending fire and rescue teams to elderly people and people who've fallen, and it's picking them back up and making sure they're okay. So it frees up our ambulance services who will not be attending those call out and those patients. They are vital resources that are going when they're not needed. And especially as we're entering the winter pressures, these are vital things that we do need to know about. And if our representative is not going to feed back and represent us, then I just want to raise that disappointment. Thank you.
Good. But you will be doing what you're saying.
Yes, I will be, looking into that. But I would like to also point out as well, I am a full-time, I've had a baby, which I completely know that's, and also in full-time work. And I do take time off. My holidays are used for meetings as well. Every meeting I do, I just want to clarify, I know it's personal, but I want to clarify that all the meetings I do, I take time off early. And, off work, I work in evenings because of meetings and health. Again, I don't have to put my baby or my children into nursery, but I've decided to do that because I'm a representative of this. But if you allow me to look into this time, because I do need time to look into this. This was quite recent, actually, during the second half of November. And for me to read all of this, I think I should be given sufficient time rather than straight away to do that.
Thank you. Thank you, Vice Chair. Thank you. So.
Thanks, Chair. I just wondered if the Vice Chair's got any feedback on the discussion on maternity services on the 27th of November. We've had concerns locally about maternity services being withdrawn from Samuel Johnson Hospital, but also we've had the inadequate judgment on Burton Hospital's maternity services. So, just that's the first question. The second one is looking ahead slightly on the 29th of January. I see you looking at social prescribing dentistry amongst other issues. Social prescribing, I think, is a really positive way forward, but I'm concerned that, and I only got anecdotal information about this, I'm concerned that social prescribers often don't have anywhere to refer their clients onto, or at least they're referring them onto the voluntary and community sector, who themselves might not have the capacity to deal with those clients effectively. So I just want to relay that concern so that the Vice Chair can follow them through. And dentistry, of course, I mean, the parlous state of NHS dentistry in particular, we hear frequently as local councillors about people unable to get NHS dentistry services, and the costs are really quite significant. So oral health for children in particular is declining. So, I just wanted to relay those concerns for you to pass on to the Scrutiny Committee. I'm sure there'll be others raising those issues as well. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. So just a question about that's a bit of lobbying there for you to pass on, but
Yes,
which is important, but I'm just saying it's lobbying there. But maternity services, did you able to give some feedback on that?
yes.
Yeah.
I can do. And also, I was going to say on the 29th of Jan, if anyone can, everyone is welcome to contact me regards to primary care dentistry. very welcome for everyone to email me on those queries as well. In regards to the maternity service, so that was one of the main items where members and also residents have raised queries regards to Samuel Johnson, especially to Samuel Johnson midwifery birthing unit, which is temporary closed. It's not permanent, it's not open, but it's temporary close. It's mentioned that midwife shortages, that's the main reason, and also training. So midwife also needs to be always constantly trained in regards to this. It was found that prior to COVID, that there was not enough demand for birth. So for example, there could be a number of days where babies were not being delivered. Now that's is a bit of an issue because midwives need to maintain their skills by by practicing the skills, using the skills regularly. But if there are no babies born for quite a few days, then can they assist in other areas? I mean, so that's what they're looking to, if, for example, if they can't do the work in Samuel Johnson midwifery unit, where it is a low risk, low risk midwifery unit, can we place them somewhere else? But you can't predict when the babies will come out at all. So it's something we need to keep a radar on. But at the same time, as Litchfield has more young families and also the geographical area is expanding, it's definitely, for the county to keep an eye out, to have this birthing unit, hopefully reopen again. And that's something we would be pushing because there are more young families and Litchfield district is expanding in general.
I think the witnesses that they had at the committee certainly were pains to point out it was still the problem with staffing, getting staff in there. And as Leona says, if you've got this, waiting around to do your job, you get fed up and maybe move on somewhere else. But there's got problems not just for Burton, but elsewhere in the county, understood. So, yeah. Dave, how do I?
It's Christmas, I'll let you off. Thank you, Chair. Just in relation to the Samuel Johnson site, I'm aware that we're coming up on 4 years since the temporary closure was announced. And just something that I think is very worth raising and very making sure that we do quiz bosses on. There is a weird little bit of employment law that very few people are aware of, where after 4 years, a temporary contract can be made permanent by either party. And if we're in a situation where there were midwives employed at Samuel Johnson site, I don't know where they are with relocation clauses and things like that. But there is a potential risk there where actually if somebody has been relocated temporarily due to the closure to, say, Burton, and they find that that's more convenient, there may then be a situation where they choose to exercise that right and change their substantive concept to be a Burton one. So I think it's very worth making sure that we've got the adequate clauses in contracts to make sure that the options remain open rather than we sleepwalk into a situation where actually some of the midwives who ordinarily would be employed at Samuel Johnson move through no fault of anybody's to Burton and then kind of exacerbate the problem. We end up with an extended closure. So just to highlight that, because I think it's something very worth raising.
Thanks. Useful information for you to know, Councillor, and take with you to the health scrutiny. Throw it in there just to Googly. Yes, Councillor Ray.
Yeah, and Leona, I was just going to ask, just to make one point on the final page of that. The final page of that report.
Yeah.
There's a point that we talked about before. Is it's important that this scrutiny committee, the health scrutiny committee, looks at public health prevention. If you could I noticed on that final page it says items for future scrutiny: obesity, diabetes, public health annual report, public health dashboard. I just asked if you could highlight that, because I just think that is so important, as well as looking at actually how we're treating people. We're actually trying to prevent health for promote health for the future.
So on a work program, and there are given dates to what the item is. So again, any members, if they have any questions, queries, or case, then again, welcome to give that to me as well on top. For example, like if there's a certain item which relates to those items, please let me know as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Oh, sorry. Did he? So I'm distracted by how come? Yeah, sorry. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Councillor, yeah.
As I've recently visited Burton Hospital
Why?
maternity ward just a few weeks ago, 5 weeks ago actually. I'm very conscious on the time that mothers who are expecting to deliver their babies will have to endure on the A38 up to an hour. So just to echo Councillor Woodward's comments, that I think we should definitely be lobbying the County Council on getting a solution for expectant mothers to be able to deliver much closer to home if they live in places like Burntwood or Lichfield. Thank you.
So the problems are still on the A38, are they? And I thought, oh, right, okay, I didn't realise that. I've avoided it for some time now. So. Right. Okay, I think that deals with health matters, unless there's an issue. A lot of feedback to the members. Don't forget, it's the County Council provision here, but we have a role to play in lobbying our issues that affect members, affect our residents. So hopefully we'll be doing that. Next item is item 5, the task group notes. There's just one task group in the interim, and that is the city centre, Lichfield City Centre Master Plan. Can I ask Colin Ball to speak on it? That's all right.
Yes, Chair, happy to do that. Now on, we talked about a number of things, the design code and engagement, the Ford site marketing prospectus, the Birmingham Road site, issues to be agreed and disagreed that we couldn't agree on, and we limited those down to one, the bus centre relocation and the demolition of the multi-storey and the key milestones. Now there's one thing which at the top of page 4, before I invite questions, second paragraph there, members express approval on the Georgian design focus. I don't want to be critical of the recorder of the meeting, but I think the discussion was a bit more nuanced than that. That there was far from unanimity from the committee on the approval of simply Georgian pastiche across the site. Some members were very strongly in favour of modern designs, and some were in favour of different kinds of designs and different heights. And so I think that, when we come to the actual next meeting, we'll look at a more nuanced reporting of that, because I think it too strongly emphasizes the Georgian focus on the design, which was, I don't think, a unanimous view from the committee at the time. But I'm happy to answer any other questions on the minutes.
Yeah, I should point out that we did have, before it became king, an email from Prince Charles supporting the Georgian on your task group. Has it not been shared?
It's not been shared,
Oh.
and
Okay, we'll
yeah.
plead ignorance then.
Yeah.
Councillor Woodward.
oh, sorry.
Thanks, Chair. I'm really glad that Councillor Ball raised that particular issue, because the word Georgian jumped out to me. And again, it's about personal preference. Georgian architecture is fantastic, but a sort of fake Georgian architecture looks fake. And whatever the design for the developments in the centre, I think that we want something exciting and modern and forward-looking, rather than some sort of pretense of looking backwards. So I just wanted to add weight to Councillor Ball's view, though others will have a different view, I'm sure, including our current king.
No, I definitely said it wasn't the king. I definitely said it's Prince Charles. I'm not going to get the king into any hot water. Councillor Booker Care.
Thank you, Chair. 2 questions. One, do you know if the options that were put forward to people to have an opinion of, were they a set of choose from these 6, or were there any open comments? Because I've made this note before in other areas, that when we present choose the best of these 6, it's like your decorator saying, would you like your lounge in purple, orange or green? Instead of saying, actually, I just want magnolia. So that's one question, if you know what was offered, because if Georgian was the best of 6, it could be that the other 5 were really bad. And in the final bit, the further work required and next steps, it does suggest they're opening out to inviting more people to join, specialist members, cabinet members. Can you tell us a bit more about that as well, please?
Can I just say, just before you come in, on the first one about open comments, I always think that's interesting. If there is a space in any questionnaire for open comments that don't fit the predetermined questions, and maybe the predetermined answers you're after, And if anybody's remember the boys from the black stuff, they ended up with the yellow shed when nobody chose yellow.
Yeah, both were
Actually, it was Alfie's saying, but I'll just correct
Yeah.
myself.
in terms of the consultation, it covered both. There was a range of options, and there was also the opportunity to write in your own particular preferences, and people did do that. And I think to be fair to Create Streets, I think they did a great job in drawing the stuff together, and they did really listen to folk. And I think what they come up with is generally good. And I think will be approved by folk when it actually comes into the public domain. As for involving more people, I think that was referring to item 3, items to be agreed, item agreed and to be agreed. And what we're hoping to do is have a discussion on housing mix on the site, because that's the only thing we couldn't reach unanimity on when we looked at all the items that were coming up, where the bus station should be located, what kind of food outlets should we have, etc. And the only thing we couldn't reach unanimity on was what kind of housing should be on the site, whether it should be social housing or housing for sale, or what type of housing for sale. So we're having a special meeting in January on that, and we're meeting with the cabinet member in February, I think, to I need to check the dates with Will at some point on that, so that we get a very clear brief on the type of housing. And we've got mixed views on the committee on the type of housing on the site, and that needs to be resolved, or at least aired in more detail, which is why we bring in somebody from the housing team, somebody from the planning team, and the cabinet member to have a thorough discussion on it.
Thank you. Sue, you wanted to?
Yes, just on that very specific issue in terms of the housing mix for the site, will the capital value of the site be dependent on the type of housing, i.e. if it's all sold to private housing, for example, to developers, will there be more capital receipt from that site? Are we aware of that yet? You know, that's perhaps a detail, but I think it's important in terms of, you know, what certainly I would like to see, and many others would like to see, is a fairer distribution of capital spend across the district rather than in one area.
Yeah, but that certainly will be a feature of the housing mix on the site, and that's already what we've discussed and why we can't reach unanimity, because the more housing for sale and the higher those prices, obviously the bigger the receipt, and the fewer housing for sale and housing for rent, the lower the receipts, and that's something we need to. Sorry, apologies, that wasn't on. I'll repeat that. The more housing for sale, the more capital receipt, the more housing for rent, the lower the capital receipt. And that's one of the reasons we weren't able to reach unanimity at a previous meeting. And that's one of the things we need to thrash out and get a proper informed view about what the best way forward is on the site. And that's something we'll be discussing in detail in the new year.
Okay, thank you. David, then Paul, please.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points if I can. First one's around the city centre bus station relocation. I note there's nothing in here about communications in relation to this, because most of the press that I see and most of sorry, not the press, but most of the interactions that I see happening in relation to that, people are very worried about where their bus station is going to go. There is still a lot of concern about where that solution is going to line up. And I think we need to make absolutely certain that we're doing a lot of work to bring the public with us on that journey. I mean, we've only got to see again that there's been a huge outcry, certainly in my ward, or our ward, I should say, Colin, over the last couple of days in relation to some changes in bus timetables that were released yesterday. This is a really live issue for people, and I think if we can really add value to this and make sure that we're bringing public along with us by making sure that the communications around that are absolutely sound. And again, in addition to that, I know there's comments in there about coach parking and taxis and other things like that. That's all really important. And actually, I think we have got problems around taxi ranks and making sure that we've got them in the right place and things like that. It's great to have those discussions going along, but actually I think it's really important that we bring the public along with us along those discussions. And where necessary, by all means, talk to them and go out and have some conversations around consultation. But making sure there's a proper communications plan there, I think, is absolutely essential. And then my second point, if I may, in relation to the demolition of Birmingham Road multi-storey car park and cinema development, I know I've been arguing since I think May, if not before, as soon as this was first mooted, that actually, given some of the issues that particularly blue badge holders are having access in the city centre due to pedestrianisation, that actually the space, the meanwhile use for the Birmingham Road site would be excellent to put in some additional blue badge parking, so that there's step-free access to the top of the precinct and from there into the rest of town. I don't know if that's something that's been discovered, but if not, I think that's something that we really can drive through. I know the planning application when it came in didn't include any additional blue badge parking, but I have been pushing for it, and I have been receiving a lot of feedback that, oh yeah, that might be a good idea, but it wasn't in there. And I think we do need to really push on that. There's a lot of pressure on Wade Street at the minute, where people are parking as close as they can on Wade Street on the double yellow lines as you're allowed to with the blue badge, but it is making Wade Street quite difficult to navigate around. I think potentially adding those additional blue badge bays there, certainly in the short term while a longer term solution is found, is a potential real positive step, not only to support people with disabilities, but also to make sure that we're supporting the businesses in the city centre who would be very welcome of that trade. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah, these are notes and not minutes.
Yep.
And that's the reason I'm here today, because a lot of these things that Councillor Robertson's talked about were actually part of the discussion. This was, I think, almost a 3-hour meeting in the end. I can't remember, but it was quite a long meeting. It was at least 2 hours, probably 3 hours. And this note does not reflect all the discussion that took place. There was discussion about communications, and we made it clear we wanted those communications to be clear. There's certainly information on the website about the bus station relocation and moving it to beside the train station, so it becomes a transport hub with bicycle parking and that sort of thing there as well. But maybe we need to promote that more widely. Secondly, in terms of the disabled parking on the meanwhile use, where the previous multi-storey car park was situated. Again, that was discussed at the meeting, although it's clearly not recorded in the notes because they're notes and not detailed minutes.
Is that okay? Would you like to have another go at him? Oh, okay. Councillor Ray, please, Paul.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Colin, I'm on this task group, but I had to send my apologies for this meeting. But the item about the Ford site marketing prospectus, just as a bit more detail about that, what stage that is at, and also as we've discussed in the task group before, what is absolutely crucial is delivery, and therefore if we are going to market one element, it's got to be coordinated with marketing all parts of the site, so we know that it all can be delivered. Thank you.
Yeah, just checking that's on. 2 points there. First, about the marketing, that will be coming back to us, I think, in January. We had a draft presentation at the previous meeting, and we'll be having a fuller presentation in January when we look at that, I believe. In terms of the overall scheme of things, we saw item 6, key milestones, a clear presentation there of all parts of the programme and how each would fit together. So that has been fully discussed at that meeting. Again, as I said earlier, these are notes of the meeting and not meant to be a representation of all the detail. But those points were duly noted during our discussions.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you, Colin, for giving that report on the notes. And I made sure there were notes from task groups, not minutes, as you've explained. So fine to have questions and asking for a bit more detail when the report's given to us. So thank you for that, Colin. Thank you. All right, the next item then, I'll just double check in case all these officers are here for nothing. No, planning committee protocol. That's it, yeah. I'd like to start off just saying that we last looked at the planning, well, as far as I'm aware, we last looked at the planning committee protocol in 2008. For those members, and that's most of you here, don't realise that between 95 and 99, we still had every single member was a member of the planning committee. That's 56 members were members of the planning committee. And then to be in control at the time, we actually suggested for a 6-month period, we actually reduced it to a more regular sized planning committee, which was actually reversed as soon as we lost the election. I'll just mention that information. And then in 2008, I looked again at the issues, the size of the committee, right to address committee by non-committee members, public speaking, training for members of the committee, which I know we've had, presentation of officers' reports, site visits, and the planning code of good practice. So it's been looked at previously, and certainly one of the things that it came up with was the 10-minute speaking time and so on, but that's all referred to, I know, in the presentation you're about to get. But I just wanted to draw attention to the historical nature of Lichfield District Council's almost unique planning committee in 1995. Thank you. So, Liz,
Thank you very much for inviting us along tonight to talk through 3 particular issues with the Planning Committee protocol that have come into play over the last few months. We're really seeking the committee's views and guidance as to how best we should address these issues, and then your support to help us to drive forward any changes. I'm joined tonight by Artemis Christophe, who heads up our planning service, who you probably all know, and then obviously Councillor Tom Marshall, who is the chairman of the planning committee. I will run through the 3 items, and I think we'll take discussion about the items as we go. Artemis is here to answer any detailed questions, and then obviously Councillor Marshall to give a view on.
I'll be doing that. Actually. Yeah.
Okay. So if you could feed in, if we could make it as interactive as possible, and we could take away as many of your views as possible, that would be really useful. So the 3 issues that we, I'll give you a quick overview of the planning committee protocols first. So we have 2 different planning committee protocols. One is for members of the planning committee, and one is for councillors who are not members of the planning committee. The protocols guide the way in which members and officers should work and interact, and ensure that planning decisions are made in a fair, impartial and well-balanced way, and really act as a guideline for everyone involved in that planning process. They are available on SharePoint. Hopefully you've had a chance to have a quick look at them. And we're picking up 3 particular issues, one that is very much written into the protocol, and 2 that are very silent within the protocol that we want your guidance on tonight. So, as I said, the purpose of tonight's session is to seek your views and guidance on possible changes and amendments to the protocol on 3 particular issues. So the first one is how we process member call-ins if a member who has called in a planning application departs before that planning application is then considered by committee. So that might be as a result of a by-election, someone who may stand down, perhaps even somebody who dies or is unwell during their service, and we then don't have the representative, that councillor representing that call-in when that agenda item comes forward. The second one is how we provide member support for residents who are in either a single member ward or a ward where there is only one member who is not a member of the planning committee. So if you've got an objector and an applicant both seeking the support of a local councillor, and that local councillor has a particular view on a planning application and either wants to support or object against it publicly within the planning committee, how do you then provide support for that alternative viewpoint? And then the third item, which has been more recently discussed by Overview and Scrutiny, is the speaking times at planning committee and the wider timing issues at planning committee that we wanted to get your viewpoints on. Okay. So do you have any questions before we go on to the first? No. So
I'd ask the question of, I did some research myself and shared it with members here. I did ask members of the planning committee about their views. So 2 questions I asked the members of the planning committee. Most planning applications are delegated to officers, but when do you think a non-major planning application should be considered by the planning committee? And the other question was non-planning committee members can submit written representations to officers and direct to committee members. So does a ward member who has asked to speak at the committee tend to add anything further to your consideration and consequential vote? Because my concern was about the, say, the single member ward there, for example. Well, everybody can write to the planning committee members or to the planning committee officer to get that put in there. So that's just I'll just leave that as an issue there. So if we go through the first one, yeah, unless any questions in the first instance, no? Generally, no?
No.
So yeah, member calling. Do you want to concentrate on that then?
No, absolutely.
Okay.
So just looking at that first question, we've had a couple of, or an instance where a member call-in prior to the elections in May didn't stand after the election. So that decision did not then refer to the planning committee for decision, and it went back to delegated decision. What we want your view on tonight is if an item is called in and a member leaves their seat for whatever reason that may be, should that stand-in still stand? Should it revert to the head of planning to determine whether or not it should still go back to committee, or should we handle it in a different way? The legal advice that we've sought in preparing the presentation tonight is that call-in should still stand, but currently the protocol is silent on it. So we wanted a discussion tonight and your views and guidance as to how you feel that we should handle that circumstance.
Okay, if I can give an example of what happened at Stafford Borough Council, this was actually February this year. The then current councillor ward member wasn't standing in May, so he wasn't there when the application was actually to be considered. And the application, there was a reason for the application being referred to committee was the application was originally called in to be decided at planning committee by councillors. And then, however, the councillor ceased to be a member prior to the application being presented at planning committee. And then two of the councillors have both confirmed that they wish to take the call in request, and they gave their reasons for that. So it has, that it wouldn't be unique to Lichfield, clearly, and there is precedent for that. I mean, others actually can call it in as well, I think. But Sue, you had a question there.
Thanks, Chair. I'm glad that the legal advice concurs with the view that I've expressed over the last 7 months, because the issue arose after the last elections where a member who lost her seat had called a decision in, and the two members who subsequently wanted to hear the discussion on the call-in weren't able to pursue that call-in, and so the decision was made by delegation to officers, and residents were quite rightly upset about that their concerns hadn't been aired in front of the planning committee. I mean, it just seems so obvious in terms of natural justice and transparency and everything else that the call-in should stand, and I'm disappointed, I have to say, that it's taken 7 months to bring it to this stage, and there's going to be more discussion before it actually happens, because we never know when a councillor is going to be run over by a bus, for example, and will a call-in still occur? I think it absolutely 100% should, and hope that other members concur.
Thanks. Claire, please, and then Dave.
Yeah, I was very surprised to learn that it wouldn't still stand, and I'm surprised we're even having this conversation because the legal advice seems to make complete and utter sense. So I'm sure there's not many people would think otherwise. So I concur.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, this boils down to the fact that it's the application which is called in, not the councillor which is called in. So actually the call-in is attached to the application's code, effectively. So once that call-in is in place, I think it would take something to, there should be something in place to remove it if necessary, rather than have some silent thing where it might just fall off. I am aware there may be an issue where potentially you've had a councillor who was calling it in for a specific reason, and the call-in notice will mention that, and potentially incoming councillors may agree or disagree with what's in the call-in notice. In that situation, it would be difficult actually, because potentially the incoming councillors may have a different view, but that doesn't prevent the actual call-in notice going to committee and committee to consider that, because at the time when it was called in, the representative called it in. So I am surprised that it's got this far without recognising that it's the application which is called in. It's not the councillor that's called in. It's the application, not the member.
Yeah, there has to be reasons why it's been called in, and I presume that officers can say, well, no, there's not enough reason here. But certainly, if there's no planning reasons, then forget it. But if there's not enough planning reasons, because otherwise you might as well just go back to the days before there's any delegation at all, except for minor things and so on. I actually called something in due to a mistake and cock up somewhere else, but not on my part. It never got to the committee, although it was refused, which is what I was wanting it called in for, and there's good reasons for it to be refused. But then when you get the report, it doesn't tell you all that you would have had it have gone to committee. The whole load of stuff there. But if it's delegated to an officer, there's very little in there why they've refused it or why they've approved it. In my experience, Tom Marshall wanted to call in there. Can I just say that in the district councils in Staffordshire, except for Tamworth, there's very little on their website, so you can't find anything out. In the case of Stafford, a parish council can call it in, and in fact, most of their reports I've seen on the reports have actually been called in by parish councils. You may not want to go there. And the same with Cannock Chase, although they say it has to be substantial. But again, a ward member, as with Stafford, a ward member can also, or an applicant even, can actually call in an application if it's been have a refusal. And also in Newcastle under Lyme, it's 2 members required to call something in. So, there you are. But Tom, you wanted to come back in. Chairman of Planning. Tom.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I remember all too well the incident which was referred to by Sue Woodward, Councillor Woodward. And I think at the time it did perhaps raise a few eyebrows because, of course, the protocol was silent on the subject. And so it did facilitate an arbitrary decision. And I think it's the nature of that arbitrary decision which has perhaps brought this to the committee this evening, because the words natural justice were used by Claire Bookham. And I think natural justice would suggest that, having been called in, there is a strong case for that being the case. And if a councillor doesn't get re-elected, which is what happened on this occasion at the local elections, and the fact that that call in then withered on the vine, I think a lot of people would consider that to be counterintuitive. I have a feeling that I was asked for a decision on this, and I did suggest that I felt that it would be appropriate for the call-in not to persist. So I was partly responsible for that, and I take responsibility for that. I think looking back, there is a strong case for saying that if it was justified for a call-in under a particular councillor who then loses the seat, then it is questionable as to whether it would be right for that call-in to cease upon the demise, not literally, but politically, of that particular councillor. So my view is very much in accordance with that of Councillors Woodward and Councillor Booker as well. And I think perhaps it is time that the protocol was brought up to date and probably fell into line with some other local authority protocols as well. And I would be surprised if there were many people who would take issue with that view. So, yes, I think I would endorse virtually all of the comments which have been made so far, Chairman. Thank you.
Before I bring Artemis in, Paul, you had your hand up, so if you can, you might be able to address that. Your point, please, Paul.
Yeah. The point I fully support the right for the call in to continue to stand, but I suppose the decision is how will the call in then operate? So the call in will give the resident the opportunity to speak at the meeting, but then who will be the alternative councillor? And I think, Dave, you made a good point, because you could say instinctively you go to the ward and then you look to the other ward councillor, but that other ward councillor might not be in support of the position that the resident took and the other councillor got. So I think that needs to be doesn't that need to be considered as well? What representation at the planning committee will the resident have with the continuing call in with the original councillor who called in the application no longer being at the meeting?
Okay, can I just say that two of the members that can't be here tonight, they both supported. They seemed it strange that you can't a call-in could not carry on because it is based on the call-in, but the arguments being put forward at the time. Whether what happens to the council after that seems a bit irrelevant to my mind, but certainly it's the issue. It's the issue for the call-in. And just to say that the committee is not the be-all and end-all, and speaking certainly isn't the be-all and end-all, because people have a chance to actually put their case to the planning committee through emails and so on. So I never quite understand why it's such a big deal to speak, except if you're a councillor, you want to be seen to be on the side of your residents. And if you're fortunate enough to have most of them being against a planning item, well, then as a ward member, you can go along and talk rubbish if you want. It doesn't matter. The reality is you can do that. If you remember the planning committee, different ball game, right? Is this before bringing Artemis in? Because I'd like to bring the officer in.
Just to respond to Paul's point there, if you call a decision in to be discussed by the planning committee, you don't necessarily have to be there as a ward member. And as you said, Chair, you can make your representations in other ways. I called a decision in fairly recently, but didn't attend. The resident himself who was objecting did. So, you know, in a sense, it doesn't necessarily need to prolong the meeting. And ward councillors who are going there to speechify for the benefit of YouTube, I think should be discouraged rather than actively encouraged. So, but it doesn't. You don't have to be there.
Yeah, sorry, you'll get. Sorry, I'll just say that you'll get in eventually. Don't worry.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to. I take that point. Yeah, just a call in doesn't automatically mean the council will speak. But I'm not totally with you what you said there, Steve. I think it is a fundamental part of democracy for the resident to represent themselves or for their representative to speak at that meeting.
Yeah.
And also we get loads of papers and emails, and actually it's quite powerful. And I've been on planning when you do have to listen to the representations that are being made
Because
to you.
you haven't read the papers.
But I suppose I was just saying, if in the resident's mind and where they got to was that councillor who'd lost their seat was going to speak and represent their position, I think that resident should have the right to sort of approach another councillor on the council to say, would you represent me at the meeting?
We always assume that the council hasn't lost his seat because he was going to speak at the planning committee against the wishes of the residents. Artemis, you definitely have your moment now. Sorry about
Thank
the
you.
delay.
Thank you, Chair. I just thought I'd come in and just clarify a couple of points that have been made. So one comment that's been made is about parish councils. They can actually call in applications and they will be taken to committee if they meet the criteria to do so. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Is that in the current protocol?
Yes, it
written down
is.
somewhere?
Yes. So we already do that. Yeah. And also in terms of comparisons with other authorities, and as some of you know, I've worked and I do work across the UK. And I'm also part of the planning advisory service for the government. So I'm open to, and I work with a lot of departments across the UK. There is a lot of variety in terms of the call-ins. You're right, there are some authorities that require a minimum of 2 members to call in an application before it's taken to planning committee. The basic rule is that whoever calls it in, or however many people call it in, they have to be done on valid material planning grounds. Now, there is no authority where I've seen that doesn't report those grounds within the report somewhere, whether it's at the top, the middle, at the end, it's in there. And there is a discussion through the assessment of that report against and ticking off each point that is raised. So whether a member does come to committee or not, but they've made representations, and it's not just members, it's members of the public as well, or any group that might make representations against or for an application, they are reported thoroughly within a report, because that's just one of the basic things that we do in planning as part of that fair process, democratic process. The other thing I wanted to just also say is that there are some authorities, and this is something that I have brought in elsewhere, where you might, for example, a member might no longer be a member of that ward for whatever reason. It can be a party decision as well, that another representation of that party could act on behalf of that member who's no longer the member and speak at committee or do that. So that is another option that could be explored potentially here, and it's not uncommon for that to happen if there's a consensus to do so. But ultimately as well, you know, if a member isn't available to attend, as Councillor Woodward said, they can make a written representation. Sometimes that could be read out on behalf of that member at committee as well, a statement. And there are authorities where that happens regularly, and that could be by objectors as well if they're unable to attend committees too, and that's a perfectly acceptable protocol to happen too. So I just wanted to quickly clarify. But the other thing, ultimately, members do have the right to speak at committee. That's part of the democratic process, and we do encourage that. We encourage that debate. It's all part of that decision-making process.
Before I bring David, anticipating what he might be saying, is that when you said somebody's in the same party that comes forward, is that because they're sort of more likely to be friendly with the people in the same party? Happens sometimes. You don't mean it's party political. This is
No,
point.
not at all.
That's all right.
Not
Just
at all.
wanted to-
It's just sometimes there is more consensus. You sometimes do get cross-party agreement, and that's great. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be the same party. It's just usually, people do group together in certain ways, but it's not political at all. It's just, how people kind of pool.
Well, it is political, but it's not party political. Because as you know,
Not in planning.
the government of the day makes the planning rules, and that's party political. And then it goes down to us where we're not supposed to be doing that. Dave, I don't think that quite answered your question you didn't ask yet.
Yeah, so please keep the idea of political parties as far away from the planning protocol as we can physically get them, because I think it's too easy sometimes to look at things like regulatory and licensing and planning and overview screening, where this isn't supposed to be a party political ding dong. We do that in a different room in this building. And I think having the idea that any member can, if they're unable to get here for whatever reason, sub in somebody and ask a question. You know what? My first protocol would be the WhatsApp group that we're all in. Of course it would, for obvious reasons. I'm sure it'd be the same for different political groupings. But one of the things, and I'll have Paul's back here, which feels very odd. Paul's on his own until May. So actually, if we do say, oh, somebody else from the same party might be able to pick it up, if you're on your own, you're going to struggle. If independents get elected, and we did have 2 independents elected in 2019, there are currently 2 independents who I believe are ungrouped. It then makes it quite difficult actually to say whether it's party. So I think having another member substitute for them, more than comfortable with. But let's keep the idea of political parties as far away from planning as possible. That feels like a very non-Dave sentence. That's the second point that I wanted to make, sorry, and it's coming across to another one of the questions that was asked in relation to ward members and how do we get ward member support for both sides of the argument, so to speak. I'm not sure that it's great for ward members to be turning up to planning committee and saying, I hate this. I'm objecting. Because actually, if a ward member wants to object, they can do that via email. They can do that via the call-in process. They can do that via, these are the reasons I feel it should be objected, or these are the reasons I feel it should be accepted. I think when you're in that committee, your role is to use your knowledge of your ward, your knowledge of the people who've spoken to you about it, your knowledge of the people who have elected you, to respond to certain points in the report. Much less than I think. So I'm not entirely certain that the role of the ward member when they're speaking at planning committee should be to take one side and to try and be adversarial to either the applicant or objectors. My view would certainly be that actually the ward member's view is to add detail to what appears in the report and to add the local flavour and to explain and to put the local context into what's on the report. And I think that will hopefully help make sure that the planning committee has got all the information that it needs. would therefore hopefully help decision making, and it will get away from this potential issue where ward members are seeing this as being adversarial, and I've got to pick one side or the other. I'm happy to be corrected on that, but I think
Yeah, I'm happy to correct you because obviously, if you're in favour or against something on a planning committee, but not a planning committee member, emphasise this again, is that then you'll pick out all the points in your favour of your argument, as we do generally, really, and reject all those that are against your argument. So it's not being adversarial. You're just saying these are the points I want to raise. I want you to note and then vote upon those points and hope that you've swung the vote. That's all it is. I don't think there's anything more than that. I mean, I used to represent a single member ward, and I think no, it never happened where, fortunately, somebody lobbied me to speak at a planning committee on something, and somebody else lobbied me to speak against something on the planning committee. That never happened, fortunately. Did happen in Burntwood, but it never happened when I was in a single member ward previously. There's little problems there. Makes life interesting. Chairman of the planning committee.
Thank you very much, Chairman. What you've just said is absolutely correct. And historically, I can very rarely remember where we've had two ward members locking horns in terms of one being for and one against. It has happened in the last 12 months. It's happened, and I'm not going to go into specifics, but it's an extremely rare occurrence. It's a bit like a blue moon, really. I suppose happens, once in a very, very long time. So we could debate this for some time, but it's actually a very, very rare occurrence. And I would suggest that it is unlikely to happen on a regular basis. I can only think of it happening once in recent times. And so for that reason, it isn't probably something which needs to be debated at great length. So I'm very much in accordance with what you've said there, Chairman. Thank you.
The question is about whether we calling carries on no matter what. And the point that Dave made about single, like Councillor Ray there is on his own, like I was for 3 years. I'm a parish council. Then you'll find that it is more difficult. But if we're talking about planning, then presumably somebody will be willing to read out the words of the member who can't be there, if they're no longer a member, and still have their view there. I think. I just wanted to point out also, I think when Artemis referred to the party political side, it was that just talking about her experience that this is what happens, and Dave, like the WhatsApp, this is likely to happen, isn't it? So don't think anything more. Paul, you want to come back in and Colin then, please?
Yeah, I was just going to.
Like to move on to the next question.
Yeah. I was just going to, the point we've discussed about what has that resident and then got the opportunity to request another councillor on the council to represent them. I don't know what the committee. I think that's important because what councillors at planning committee do, the resident is often very passionate and very emotional, and maybe not totally coherent. But then a councillor can, because they understand the principles about the process, maybe the core principles about the planning, they can just help put the argument maybe in a clearer way on behalf of the resident. So I just think it's really important that resident does have the ability to approach a councillor to request that they can represent them as the councillor who'd lost their seat, and the example is no longer able to. But I just wonder because do we need to reach a decision on that? This committee will give a steer of that's what we feel is a way forward.
Well, if this is specifically about that, if you don't mind, I can bring Colin in next then. Is that specifically in response to Paul's comment there, please? And just a minute. Yeah.
I think we've got a real risk of the law of unintended consequences coming and kicking us on this one. So if I take my ward, for instance, I work very closely with Councillor Ball. One of my favourite phrases, you usually struggle to get a cigarette paper between us on most things, because we approach things in a very similar way. So actually, I can't think of many situations where somebody would get in touch with me and I say, oh, no, sorry, I'm already speaking in favour or against this application. And then somebody would go to Councillor Ball and say, can you speak on my behalf? And him say, yeah, I completely disagree with Dave. I'm more than that. Because actually being able to request a second councillor, in a lot of situations, interestingly not with this council, but previously, it tended to be actually the councillors that represented an individual ward worked very closely together, came from the same political tradition, and may not have differing views. Although interestingly, the one that we've had this time did come from. Let's not go into that. Because in that situation where it's, say it's a dual member ward, somebody approaches the first councillor, no, I'm already speaking against. They approach the second ward councillor, and actually the second ward councillor says, well, actually, no, I'm not in favour of this proposal either. Well, then where do they go? Are they then allowed to approach the other 45?
So that was a disenfranchisement, aren't they?
So, well, no, they're not disenfranchised because actually they are able to go and present their case to the committee. That's absolutely a thing. And in terms of supporting somebody, we've got excellent officers who know their way around planning law much better than individual non-planning committee members do. So there's absolutely a case of them not being enfranchised is total nonsense. Because then are we going to end up in a situation where potentially there's going to be an application over in Colton and the nearest councillor that somebody can find to back them up is going to be in Paisley, because I think that's about 40 miles, isn't it? It's only 30. So I think there's just if that's a route we go down, there's potentially some problems that may.
Well, can I just point out that whoever the councillor is, they're going to be a volunteer. So, you know, you can't say, right, you've got to do this for me. So, you know, this is all about your personal communication. Colin, then
Got one councillor on board.
you're not your mic's not on. So
Yeah, I'm just saying. Yeah, I think we've probably rehearsed this argument. I'm just saying the resident would have got a councillor to support them in the meeting, and then the disenfranchised might not be quite the right word, but they are then unrepresentative. If they should have the right to be able to not force, as you say, Steve, but to request another councillor if they're supporting to speak publicly in the meeting on their behalf.
I think we moved on to the second question, but I want to get the first one sorted first.
Yeah, Chair.
Colin, please, thank you.
I was going to suggest that we're having a heated agreement here largely, because I think on the point of whether the Colin should continue, I've not heard anyone speak against it. So I would suggest we move on. And the other discussion we've been having is a side issue, and it's not germane to this particular point.
Can I just be clear with members that you're supportive of the idea that the call-in should continue for the reasons we've discussed? That's all I wanted that one. So yes, please. Right.
Can I just make a general point though? I mean, it does seem as though we're looking either at minute detail or, if you like, the philosophical role of a councillor, you know, and we're sort of missing some of the stuff in between. I think councillors have a responsibility to be straight as well with their electors, so that if a councillor, having read the planning report or looked at the application, doesn't think there's a ground for an objection, for example, then you have to be honest and say so, rather than leading a resident up the garden path. So that demand for a voice to represent a particular point of view at the planning committee, I think, is entirely wrong.
I can just say that that is the ideal, and although people may become weak when it's a very marginal seat, yeah, that is true, that you would be making the case and trying to be honest with the objector. So, as we've done in the past, I know. So, do you want to come specific on this? So, I really want to move on to these things.
Just very quickly, if I may. I just wanted to. Sorry.
We dealt with the call-in. So.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point that for someone listening to this or watching this, they could get the impression that if you don't have someone to take a contrary view, then it's a very one-sided process. And I would suggest that's not the case, because of course you've normally got the applicant or the applicant's agent. You've also got an objector, and then you could well have a ward councillor. Now, whether the ward councillor is for or against is a moot point, but it's not a one-sided situation if you haven't got a ward councillor speaking for or against, because you could well have a very, very persuasive applicant's agent. Some of these agents, these professionals, are extremely good at what they do.
And usually ex-planning officers.
I beg your pardon, sorry.
And usually ex-gas.
Yes, they're very often ex-planning officers, of course. Yes, they're often gamekeepers turned poachers, of course. Yeah. So we mustn't get the impression that if you haven't got a ward councillor speaking for or against, that it's an invidious process. It's not. And as I say, you can have some very, very persuasive speakers as objectors and as applicants or applicants' agents. And that, I think, is where the balance of power very often lies. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Now, the second one, I get the impression we've had expressed a view on it for single member wards, but I don't know whether officers wanted to come back or anything on that at all. Or is there a consensus that, we're okay for other people to speak? But we don't have to have somebody necessarily to have to object if someone supports or someone to support if someone objects. I'm not sure that's the case, is it?
No,
Yeah,
so
that's fine.
I think we've covered very much the two first agenda
Yeah.
items. So on the member calling, I think we're taking away that
That's-
absolutely you feel that it should
Support
still
that.
stand, and that anything that member submitted should be read out at committee,
Yeah.
so that those views are carried forward, which
Yeah.
we will take forward. On the second point, if I could just seek
Yeah, please.
clarity.
Yes, please.
Is it that you think that if someone is in a ward where there's only one member, that they have the opportunity to seek support for their views from an alternative member, but there is obviously no guarantee that any member may support their view? Or is it that you feel that if there's one member, they then can't reach out to anybody? So what position do you want us to take on that? What's the guidance from?
Sorry, to seek another member for what? Sorry, did
So
you say?
so if I'm in a one member ward, and I've gone to that member and they've said, no, I'm supporting the applicant. Do
Oh, I
I
see.
have
Right.
anywhere else to go? Or
yeah.
do I just have to then just represent myself? Or can I reach out to an
Yeah.
alternative? Then there's no guarantee that any other councillor I approach may say, yes, of course, I take your viewpoint on this and I'll object. But do they have the opportunity to reach out, or don't they? I suppose that's the clarity that we need from committee.
Yeah, I have a view, but Sue and then Claire, please.
I would certainly want to resist that. It almost sort of is councillor for hire, even though money might not exchange hands. I think if the ward councillor approaches a colleague, that's fair enough. But if the resident is trawling round for someone who, is willing to do a speech on their behalf, here's my speech against, here's my speech for. Does that remind you of anyone? I just think that's it opens up all sorts of unintended consequences.
If I may suggest another option which may compromise, that in the absence of a direct ward representative or a single one or not one there, maybe they could come to the councillors and ask, would you put a trawl out to members to say, would anybody be interested? Not approaching individual members and members and members and members for hire, but if anybody knows of this, if anybody's interested, but it's because in that mind to me is somebody who might be unconfident, who would want a bit of support to go in there and speak and just say, look, I just need a bit of support here of somebody. And it might not be a member that gives them that support. It could be a family member. It could be somebody who lives local. They will be looking, look, can somebody just help me out? Because I really want to speak. I've never done this before. I'm just a bit underconfident. Is there anyone? I can't get my ward member. And I'd like to think that all is not lost. All is not lost. If your ward member cannot represent you, then that's it. It's a done deal. But there must be some alternative options without them to trawl everybody. And it's that middle ground I'm wondering about.
Dave, please.
I'm actually quite concerned about the idea that we're only going to bring this for single member wards. Because actually, it's entirely possible that if you're in a 2-member ward or a 3-member ward, that you approach all 3 councillors and all 3 councillors say, no, we disagree with you on that point. And if we're going to create this situation where being in a single member ward gives you the opportunity to go outside of your ward, but being in a multiple member ward doesn't give you that same opportunity, that seems that there are alarm bells ringing in. I feel that don't like it. Don't try and spell that. Although if you get it into the minutes, like that just feels wrong. And I'm very concerned that we know that there are people who really struggle with public speaking. Members may have noticed that's probably not a failing of mine. And I'm aware that some people will require additional support in able to speak at that meeting, but it doesn't have to come from a councillor. And I think we go back to the idea of the ward member speaking on behalf of their ward. And okay, if there's a vacancy when a planning application comes in, we will draft somebody in from a neighbouring ward to take over. That's appropriate. But we could again potentially end up in a situation where, for whatever reason, I'm going to take Colton as an example because it is a single member ward, right up at the top of the district, and potentially they could be getting somebody in from Little Aston and Stonald as an alternative. That's not a local view, and at that point, why are we saying that it has to be a member that provides? So I'm not sure about this idea of being able to say, oh yeah, well, go and find another councillor wherever. It seems like we're literally just opening up a can of worms, and there's not been enough discussion about how this would work, even if it were.
I'd be fascinated to know where all these wonderful councillors are that can turn the planning committee around just on their speech. Of course, I've done that. I was a single member ward councillor for 12 years. All wards should be single member wards, just like Parliament constituencies only have one member of Parliament for each constituency. But I went to a planning committee in my previous life and actually told the planning officer what I was going to do, and they reversed the recommendation simply because I'd spotted that they'd missed something out in the conditions that they didn't follow through. And I didn't want to speak. I wasn't in favour of this application, but I thought, like in the solicitor, really, well, I'm the only one to speak on behalf of this applicant. Didn't agree with the application, did my best. Okay, fortunately, went bankrupt, and the thing that he wanted didn't get built anyway. So that was okay. But I'll bring it in briefly. But I don't want to debate with the chairman of the planning. The idea is for you to listen to answer some questions. We haven't asked you any questions yet, Tom.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a very quick one. I'm a little bit concerned that we may be introducing a little bit of complexity here, when in fact I thought one of the aims of this process was to simplify the protocol. The third item, which we're coming on to shortly, is about speaking times, etc., trying to streamline the planning committee meetings, which sometimes could become very protracted.
We're not on there yet.
They could be very protracted. All I was going to say was, by introducing the option to have 2 ward members speaking, that completely undermines the principle of trying to streamline the meetings in terms of speaker time, etc. So I'm a little bit concerned by the principle of doing that, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there a view? I mean, you had your hand up, William, but is anyone going to propose that we support the idea of, councillor for hire, really? No? You supported it? Do you want to go on, Liz? Sorry, I'm being naughty there. Sorry.
Maybe it's more about defining the role of members speaking at committee and actually defining them as having a voice of that ward and not particularly supporting one viewpoint or the other, but their own viewpoint. And now if that accords with an objector or an applicant, so be it. But ultimately, is their role to actually represent their view as a ward member and not actually to be there for one viewpoint or the other? And is it about actually writing that into the protocol so that it's not, so there isn't a lack of support for one side or the other? There's a view from the ward, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because you can have another case of one objector, one supporter, or 2 objectors, 2 supporters, and ward member. And in a lot of cases, now you remember, think about it, what the ward member is there for isn't specified. So they could, in fact, as you say, I just will know from experience, that is just to give their view, as you say, in theory, as the overall view. So
exactly. And where
you were talking about having that specifically referred to in the protocol.
Yeah, and where you may have a multiple member ward is the role of that ward member who does speak to seek the views of all the ward members to represent a balanced view.
Yeah,
so that they're the ward
how do you do
view.
that? You tell me how you do that.
I don't.
Yeah, forget that. Don't go there.
Forget that.
I mean, I can't see how that's going. No, that's not going to work there. That bit. Anybody else want a view? I mean, we've got a consensus on what we want. We're not suggesting other members. If the ward member is taking a particular view, we're not saying you have another member to take the opposite view, even though it's from Little Aston and it's in Colton or anywhere, are we? They want feedback. The officers want feedback. I mean, and so does Tom. So,
well, I mean, if I could come in, Chair, please through you. I'd be concerned about making this a free for all for people to speak randomly. I think, I just couldn't support that personally.
Okay, Kelly?
I actually really like the point that Lizzie put across there about clarifying what the ward member is for, rather than something specific like this says.
Yeah.
Are you representing for or against everyone? Clarify what the ward member's for, and then we don't need to look elsewhere outside of the ward. Thank you.
Is that okay? So that basically the ward member will just say that you're there to represent or to give your view as the ward member, I would say, because unless you say, well, you say you're representing the ward, when did you do a consensus? When did you do a vote or something like that? So it gets a bit complicated, but you assume that they're there to give a view as the local ward member, then that's fine. But there's nothing more than that. They may be objecting, maybe supporting at the end of the day, but they're not too just, they haven't got to choose one or the other, have they? And if they're very clever, they'll get both people voting for them. Sorry, am I being cynical? I blame all those years as being a councillor. Is that helpful? Are you sure? Yeah, I'm watching you. Okay, well, I'm grateful for that. Now, speaking times. Before we go to speaking times as well, though, well, I just asked this question. I noticed in a number of councils as well that I don't think it happens here where if somebody everybody's speaking on the planning application, whether it's the agent or the applicant or people objecting from the public, you can't ask them a question at the moment, can you?
No.
But I've seen it where the people have been asked to clarify something, or something's cropped up and that's for clarification, or in one case where the agent, yes, an ex planning officer, was asked, would they accept this condition? And the agent said yes, they would. And so on the basis that that did get formally made, then you haven't got to defer the planning item to the next meeting or another committee meeting. You've got the answer there, and then there's yes, permission is given on the condition of that. So I'll just put that in for yourselves when you do your presentation. If that's okay.
I'll just come in very quickly on that
Please,
point.
thank you very much.
because,
Thank you. Sorry to
that is something that I've got quite a lot of experience at my previous authority
say
at
that.
West Northamptonshire Council, which is a newly merged authority. So it was quite common for members to listen to speakers and then, well, in theory, they were supposed to ask points of clarity of those speakers if they so wished, whether it was an objector
Is that the
or
chair,
an
though?
applicant.
Only through the
No,
chair.
through the chair, but any member could ask the question.
Thank you.
However, this was something that I sought very quickly to change, because what you found is you'd find a not very organised debate that didn't involve professional officers asking questions of objectors, applicants, that quite often went beyond the realms of planning. And it's very difficult to pull people back once that certain information is out there. And it can tilt the balance and tilt certain views at times. So I would err on the side of caution if any member was thinking about bringing something like that in. And in terms of asking applicants or agents conditions, etc., that should always be done via the professional officers in the room through the chair. And we do not ask permission. It's going to sound quite draconian, but we do not ask permission of applicants and agents to impose conditions apart from pre-commencement. We always seek support for those. We impose those conditions upon them if members feel fit and it's appropriate to do so, and it meets the tests, the necessary tests to do so. So again, I would sort of advise caution over that too. It's just to maintain control over the process as well.
Yeah, I mean, I can see the dangers whenever you write these things. Oh yeah, consider the danger of that. Being very specific about only planning matters, all the rest of it. But now it can go wrong when people are asked a further question, especially if the person being asked is a clever one and throws it in there, just out there. Then, but Staffordshire Moorlands and East Staffs both allow speakers to be asked questions and can ask questions. But your advice, professional advice, etc., is best not to go there if you don't want
So
to.
my advice, based on best
Yes.
practice across the UK,
Yeah.
is to not do that. Ideally, I do understand where members might wish to.
That's just me. It's for my research.
But you know, the debate should always be through the chair with based on with the officers, the professional officers and legal support in that room, rather than you know, a resident's viewpoints being too heavily weighted, whereas their views are normally reasoned through the report process and the assessment of that report to reach its conclusions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's very helpful. The ones I've seen that looked okay, but I could see the dangers. Can I just say the other thing is, do we give guidance for speakers? Do we have a leaflet document that we give to speakers coming to planning committee? I've not seen it, so I'll get a copy of that, but I'm not seeing that. I didn't know. I've seen others. I mean, some websites are better than others. You can get these documents of other local authorities. So, right, I'm going to move. If you do the presentation now, and then we'll have questions. That'd be great.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Chair. So speaking times at committee has been to this committee not too long ago. And we wanted to bring it back.
You didn't like it.
Because it has been raised again
Oh, yeah.
as a discussion point, and we've also had a number of meetings that have ended up with standing orders being suspended, where members of the public who've come along to talk or to have their planning application considered have been deferred to following meetings. We don't think that gives a particularly good impression of the planning committee. And as officers, we're starting to contemplate whether or not we need to engineer meetings so that we make sure there's fewer contentious or potentially contentious items at a meeting, because we know the debate that takes place may mean that we can't get through those applications efficiently within a meeting. As a team, we've been doing a large amount of work to reduce down officer speaking time. So historically, officer speaking times have been a challenge, sometimes upwards of 40 minutes presenting an item, which shouldn't be required because obviously all the members that attend committee have read the papers, they have opportunities to speak to the team if they have any questions. But there are other areas where potentially we could, through speaking times, have a long agenda item, and we just wanted to bring it back for discussion, particularly given the council's ambition to have a very efficient, effective planning process where both members and members of the public attending have a very positive experience of. So I just wanted to go through kind of the logistics with you in terms of the speaking time that you can have at a meeting on one agenda item. So what we're aiming for with the office and presentation is to be generally no longer than kind of 5 to 8 minutes. There's obviously a chairman's introduction, but then we could have upwards of 30 minutes speaking time if you have an objector, an applicant, and then potentially two ward members. So that could be upwards of 30 minutes. You then have the debate. Now we've put 20 minutes there, but actually having done an assessment on recent meetings, and you'll see on the next slide, that actually isn't that representative, and oftentimes debates can be much longer. So some agenda items go through really, really quickly and you'll kind of complete a meeting in an hour and a half, but others can go on much longer. And I suppose it's those much longer ones that we need to kind of be aware of when considering the timing. We also wanted to raise the question with you and get your views on the actual speaking at committee. Whilst it's definitely part of the democratic process, saving information for the committee to speak at the committee means that that information then doesn't really form part of the wider democratic process in terms of assessing that planning application. We want to be, as a planning team, a very open planning team that encourage members to talk to us, write to us, tell us about their concerns. And in doing that, what we can make sure we do is we take that into consideration in the report. We ensure that there's a balanced and fair assessment of that that's written down so it's much more transparent. And the actual speaking at committee is almost the cherry on the top of the cake. It's not the cake, if that makes sense. And I suppose we wanted to highlight the fact that perhaps previously that process hasn't been well publicised in terms of making sure that that is seen as a vital part of that planning process. So if you object to a planning application, use us as a team, tell us, talk to us, explain your concerns. We'll then talk to you about your planning concerns and whether or not they're material planning matters or not, and make sure they're reflected in the report, which then should bring into question, do we need as long as we currently have at committee for speaking times? You're not going to be able to read that. I can't read that.
I can read it. It's on a piece of paper.
So what we've done just to aid your discussion is we have looked at a couple of recent planning applications. So you can have a quick look at the breakdown of those particular agenda items. So if you take the one at the top, that's land of south of Shortbutts Lane. I'm actually squinting and I can see it now, David. Thank you very much. So the officer presentation there was 15, which is longer than we would like. The applicant spoke for 5 minutes. The debate was 75 minutes, which ended up with a 96-minute agenda item. Cannock Road Care Home, we had a very brief introduction from the chair, 10.5 minutes, which again is a little longer than we'd like. And then 4.5 and 5 minutes and a 64-minute overall agenda item there. What's interesting when you look down this table is that whilst ward members are offered up to 10 minutes, in the ones we've looked at, they've never exceeded 5 minutes. Applicants and agents do tend to fill their time slot, but certainly the time limit offered to ward members has not been taken up. So you could even argue, is it worthy debating it? But I think if we'd gone back and back and back, I think we would have found examples where that 10 minutes has been used to the full. So I suppose our observations are that the debate is the most lengthy part of the process, which you might argue is right and just, given that it's a democratic process and debate needs to be open and detailed. Officers are now aiming to keep their introductions below 15 minutes and closer to 5 where possible. Ward members do not tend to use their full 10 minutes. Applicants and agents do, as I said. And this is not an exhaustive list, but it's probably as much as we could do in terms of the time we had to prepare this, to spend hours kind of timing and watching. But we can go back and do more if the committee wanted us to look at more. I then wanted to highlight to you, and there are all sorts of examples, but this is just a handful of other authorities that we've looked at. And again, another area for debate would be whether or not the full 5 minutes should be offered to objectors and applicants. A lot of authorities take a view that 3 minutes is long enough to discuss the material planning matters in hand. And I think that's also an important point when attending a planning committee meeting, and it hasn't been the case often in recent times. Those presentations should only be about material planning considerations. They shouldn't be about, I don't like this person, I don't like the way they've behaved, that shouldn't come into play. It should be about those material planning matters, and arguably 3 or 5 minutes should be long enough to present those. So this is just, as I said, it's a snapshot. There will be other examples where it is longer, where it's or even shorter. But I guess what we wanted from the committee today was your views. Should we retain the 10 minutes? Should we contemplate shortening the 5 minutes for objectors and applicants? And what are your views on the speaking times at committee and what they ought to be moving forward?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Before I bring people in, I just looked at the other authorities in the county, except Tamworth, who's got very little information you can find on their website. And Staffordshire Moorlands was 3 minutes and 3 minutes. That's to say for public and for the ward member. East Staff's 3 minutes both. South Staff's was 3 minutes or 5 minutes if it's a major. Same for the ward member. Stafford was 3 minutes both. Newcastle under Lyme, that requires 2 members for a call in, if you remember. So that was 5 minutes each. Cannock Chase 10 minutes each. But then Birmingham City Council was another one I looked at, the absence of Tamworth, was 3 minutes each. So 3 minutes is the most popular. Just ask one question, which is regarding this presentation. You make a note there. It is also worth noting that we continue to encourage members to write to officers with their concerns in advance of the committee. So that saves time later on, because you've had the, hopefully you've had that fully answered by the time the committee meets or at the committee. In my experience, I used to write to all members of the planning committee, and I understand if its protocol is all members of the planning committee and the officer, so they're included in that. And then you might just want to say a few minutes at the committee, but it's actually getting that information there. But I just wondered if we continue to encourage members to write to officers with their concerns. Is that happening? Because I did write to all planning committee members, but only got 4 responses.
So Chair, if I might come in
Please,
here.
please,
So yes, we do have a lot of engagement with members, and I hope members can say that they do hear from our officers. And if you don't hear from any particular officers, I'd like to know who they are.
Simon, I think.
But we did also recently introduce our member drop-in sessions that we ran monthly,
Yes, I saw
which
that.
were quite popular, and we've kind of changed that a little bit now. So we've now rebranded it as Fireside Chats with myself. So you can come and speak to me about any concerns that you might have or any queries you might have. There is no question too small or too big, and if I can't answer it there and then you know, members will say that I will come back to you with answers, and I will take queries forward as well, whatever it is, whether it's planning or planning enforcement or policy or whatever it might be. We are here to help. So those sessions are running just before planning committee each month at the moment. So they're in the members room. So I sit in there and members come along and you can have a chat with me informally, and I'll make lots and lots of notes and then get back to people on that. So that's another way, obviously by email as well, or phoning or however, but we are here to help. And I hope that you found, particularly in the time that I've joined Lichfield, that we're more accessible, because that is very important to me, that we are accessible, that we build that trust with yourselves, because you are, you know, the gatekeepers to our residents, and it's very important that we inform you, because that helps us do our job a lot better as well. So yeah.
Okay, so I'll open to the floor, and I'm going to start the bidding as 1 minute for speaking. So Paul.
Yeah, thank you. I just, I think firstly,
3 minutes.
I think the point about encouraging members to contact planning, I think that's a really important point, and it's worth. I just don't think you underestimate how much that you should communicate that through, because I think can be a fear. Maybe it was certainly when I was a new councillor, like it might be inappropriate. It might be seeing us trying to influence the planning department as opposed to encouraging it. It's helpful as part of the process. The official. I was on the planning committee, as Tom knows, for a number of years, and it's outward facing, it's public facing, and for that to be efficient is really important. And I was just mentioning a bit earlier that the examples, and it happens where somebody, a resident or an applicant, sits through a whole meeting and then it runs out of time because of various reasons, maybe some mismanagement of timing, and that resident goes away, has to come back. That's just not good. And I think where I'm at is probably 5 and 5, may even be 5 and 3, to be honest. But then I just had a question, maybe for you, Artemis, with your experience. 5 and 3, you say you're 5 and 5. Then we have an application like Rugeley, yeah. Is there? How does that work now? And is there discretion to be able to have a fuller debate when you have a major application coming forward, rather than all applications being restricted by whatever the new protocol is?
The
So-
discretion, I presume, for the chair.
Through you, Chair. So yes, when you have a major significant case like that, so by permission of the chair of committee, they can make the decision to extend that period, particularly if we know beforehand that a particular member or somebody wants to make a longer representation. If that's by agreement with, usually it's in conjunction with the head of planning and the chair of committee, then that's normally okay. I mean, if the chair of planning committee says absolutely no way, we're sticking to the 5, then we stick to the 5. But yeah, it can be, you know, on special circumstances, we can adapt that. It's the same with officer presentations as well. I mean, we've done a lot of work to condense those right down, and there's still a bit of work to go. But on the odd occasion where you get a really significant case, you might need a little bit more time to go through all of the issues. So, you know, again, they work hand in hand, don't they, in that case?
Main thing is to get the planning application dealt with properly, isn't it? So you don't want to curtail things if it's not necessary, but you don't want to elongate it. Yeah, Whaley, Councillor Hone.
Thanks, Chair. So I would be more in favour of 3 minutes and 3 minutes, and it for being equal, because you know, some colleagues might not like what I'm about to say, but I don't think as councillors we're more important than anyone else. So I'm in favour of having an equal share in the talking. In regards to the planning process and the planning portal that we have here, I find it very, very useful, because I've signed up using email and I can get notifications when there's changes in applications, which I think is fantastic. So if there is an application that a couple of residents are interested about, I will sign on and I will get notifications when things are updated. I think the real kind of the real crunch to this debate would be the debate time in the actual planning meetings itself. And of course, I think that would be the onus of that would be on the chair to orchestrate and to conduct business in a timely manner as well. I don't think we should put any type of rules in to stifle any debate. I think it would be undemocratic. And that's me done. Thanks, Chair. Hope
Thank
I
you.
was under a time limit.
We'll no time with the scrutiny. Oh no, we can defer till next week, Christmas Day or something. Sue, please. Thank you.
I absolutely agree with Councillor Hone. 3 minutes and 3 minutes. The longer time a person has to speak, the more they've got to sort of expand and go off in different directions. It focuses the mind. It makes them. They've got to be absolutely succinct and clear in the issues they're putting forward. And I also agree about the planning committee debate, because that was by far the longest time. And if we're talking about the efficiency of our planning processes and trying to make sure that applications are processed in as timely a way as possible, while not wanting to stifle debate, I think planning committee members need to be aware of that discipline and perhaps try to stick to almost a 3 minute slot, because, you know, and it does depend on the chair. I'm sorry to say, Councillor Marshall, on this occasion, because, you know, I've watched planning committee meetings and often members are not adding anything to the debate. You know, comments have been made previously. They just, dare I say, sometimes people feel as though they need to make their views known, whereas that's not always necessary, really, and particularly if they're not ward members. There's also the issue, but, you know, sometimes people start speaking and can't get out of their speechifying, and I haven't used that word before. So,
No.
you know, I mean, if there was some way to just sort of
Write it down.
discipline members of the planning committee to make sure that they do get through the debates in a timely way, I think that would be helpful. But 3 and 3 is my view as well.
Can I just, I'll bring the chairman in at the end. Don't worry, I'll go make sure I have your views at the end. Colin, and then Claire.
Yes, Chair, I think we're perhaps moving towards a unanimity again, because I would.
This is my role. This is my role.
I would support 3 and 3. I cannot imagine a situation where you can speak for 10 minutes on a matter of planning issues. And one of the problems, I think, I've attended a few planning committees speaking on behalf of residents. I've observed some, and it always shocks me about the length that people go, and they're not talking about planning matters in the issues that they're raising. And the Chair, you've asked what guidance we've got, and there might be some written guidance. And I wonder whether we should be actually sitting down with people before they make the presentation to say to them, look, you've got to score all that out because it's not a relevant planning matter. And you can only object to issues if there's a planning concern, not because that there's something irrelevant that they're raising. So I see no reason why it should be any more than 3 and 3.
Going to say the guidance I've seen in other local authorities, I haven't found out for speakers specifically, is exactly that. I know that you want to talk about this, and I know, but this can only be planning committees. Hopefully, that the members themselves need to take cognizance of that as well. Claire, and then
Sorry, Chair.
oh yeah,
Because it was members also.
Yeah, no, that's what I just said. Yeah.
Committees who were
Yeah.
talking about non-planning matters,
that's
not
what-
just
that's what I just said, but I didn't
residents.
say that loudly. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I feel it's a little bit like my handbag. If you give me a bigger handbag, I will fill it.
Yeah.
And if I have a small handbag, I'll just put the essentials in. So I'm there with the 3 minutes and 3 minutes. I just want to also pick up what was said earlier from Councillor Ho, that we are no more as members should have any more speaking time than the residents and the objectors. Our previous point that was raised, the number 2 of your 3 that were brought up, we did discuss about clarifying the role of the ward member. And if we did that, would we need 2? There's an instant 10 minutes you can get rid of there by just having a single one if you kept it at the same times. But actually, if we're all the same times, then there you go. And I also think there should be a way of discussing the time taken on debate, not to stop democracy, but if it starts to go beyond a reasonable time, then maybe it should be called time and brought back at the next meeting and postponed. But to have the times brought up there just for the debate does seem something that does need to be looked at. And it's the small 5 minutes, 3 minutes seems minuscule compared to some of those debate times. Thank you.
Can I just ask who actually is allowed to speak? The objector, supporter, ward member? Is it 2 objectors, 2 supporters? Remind me, sorry. Just one of each at the moment. We have that as when members think about that. I mean, sometimes you have quite a few objectors. You persuade them to have one spokesperson if they can. That was understand. Okay. Just to say that on the 3 minutes and short term, the first Labour candidate, Labour Party member, was a member of Parliament before. Remember his speech early on when he answered the question. I could say a lot more, but I haven't got the time. I know I haven't got the time. I thought, yeah, maybe you run out of all the ideas you can say, but it looks good if you say you haven't got the time. So 3 minutes. I could have said more, but Dave. So I'm giving a lot of people tips here, by the way. Politics. Claire has picked up a tip now.
Thank you, Chair. There's 2 points I want to make. The first one, and I must be feeling ill because I've gone out to bat once for Paul today, and I'm about to agree with Way. But yeah, actually, I wouldn't want to see a discrepancy between the amount of time given to a ward member or a member of the public. I think each speech is performing a different function. As Lizzie spoke about earlier, and I don't think that either of those functions is necessarily more or less important than the other. So I think that's an important thing to show. My major concern with this is we're dealing with the problem that planning meetings are going on too long and items are going on for too long. Debate is the most lengthy part of any agenda item. Ward members aren't using this time anyway, so if we cut the ward members' time that they're not using anyway, it's not going to solve the problem. So actually, we can dance on the head of a pin as much as we want about 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 4.279 minutes. But actually, if we are looking at this in terms of we want to make sure that these agenda items are getting through planning faster, so we can get more on agendas, and we're not having to things running off the end of the 3 hours. And in reality, you don't want to be extending meetings beyond 3 hours. It's not a great idea. I'm not sure that this change is going to solve that problem. So if I'm honest, I'm pretty agnostic about 10, 5, 3. People will fit their speeches into whatever time we give them. But it does seem that actually, if we're looking at the protocol here, whether it needs to be clarified, whether it needs to be printed off and given to, if we can find a way of making sure that the debate follows those rules of debate, follows that structured format, so that we're getting through that as quickly as possible. And actually, sometimes, I mean, I'm looking at the one from the previous slide where it was a 75-minute debate on it. It's because it's an absolutely massive development. And I think sometimes debate will need to go long because there are a lot of issues that come up with it, and there's going to be a lot of things, and you might be discussing conditions and blah, 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 blah. So I don't necessarily think long debate is necessarily a problem. If we feel that the items are going on too long, then we need to look at why those items are coming on too long. And when we've had evidence saying the reason that these are going on too long is because ward members aren't using the time that they've got, cutting the time that they're not using is not going to shorten the debates. So I think if we are looking at this in terms of wanting to speed these up, we've got to look at the debate. Also on the previous slide, yeah, and it seems that it's chair's intro, get that, understands, office presentation, chair's offer views, then applicant agent, then ward member, then objector. Surely the chair should be offering their views as part of the substantive debate, and actually potentially shifting that into where it's going to be part of the debate would mean that we're not coming back to things, we're not having to retouch base on things. And it just seems to me that if we're going to have a process, it should be chair introduces it, absolutely makes sense. Officer, applicant agent, ward member, objector, then the members of the committee all discuss it as one, rather than having the kind of the chair jumping in and then other people jumping in and then back to the chair and then back to the other. And I mean, I'm looking at the one of these that's in my ward. The chair actually spoke longer than the ward member, and that surely can't be a thing.
I think the time of speakers is actually part of it. We've heard that officers have been encouraged to say less. I mean, it does presuppose, and that's your duty, actually, to read the reports before you get to committee. It shouldn't be up to the officers to have to expel it all out. I mean, I remember being quite shocked when I first came here, sat in this chair as chair of Environmental Health Services, and the officers took over and read everything out because that's what they did before I got it, if you like. It was very weird. So there is that presupposition, but I think it's only part of it because we said that officers have been encouraged to show the presentations, and it's all part of it, really. But certainly the chair comes into it, and I'll certainly bring him in at the end there, which is Councillor Leon. Do you want to say something, Leon?
Many have expressed my views already. So just a few questions is, if there are 3 cases in one of the meeting and for example, like it's 1 hour each, then the last one, would that be, is that cut short? You have to make sure it's cut short. Do you have to extend it? Because comparing the last one to the first one, would that be seen as unfair? And then the second question is that the committee size is quite a lot of members in there. Is that a set number or can that be changed? Because if we're having everyone's views there and views are getting repeated, is there a need for a change in the number in the committee? Thank you.
Can I just say, for officers' sake, as a councillor, you want to be seen to be doing your job. So not speaking because you've absolutely agree with the previous speaker and the previous speaker before that. It's difficult not to want to say something. So I'm just being sympathetic to that situation, but it's a reasonable thing. So you want to come back, and then I'll certainly bring in the chair. No, I'll bring in Tom. Can I have the last word? You see, Tom, if that's helpful for the chairman.
Thank you. I think some of those questions are governance type questions, but I mean, the bare minimums, you do have to have a quorum of members in order to run a planning committee. Now that number can vary. I mean, I've sat on committees where we've had anything from 4 committee members right through to 25 or more sitting and all debating at meetings. At worst, it's an authority in Cambridgeshire. The meeting started at 6 and finished at 2 a.m.
I think I've seen that one.
Because, 10 o'clock was standing orders. The chairman was quite adamant that he wanted to hear everything. And you had members of the public sitting in that meeting until 2 a.m. waiting to speak on an application. So, it really varies. And, when we have cases, like you say, that come up close to the standing orders, people do start clock watching. You do lose focus, I suppose, occasionally at times. And there is we're all human, and, that people do start thinking, oh, I want to go home now, I'm tired. Let's just get through this. So we are mindful of that. And this is part of that process to make them run more efficiently. So what are the things that we can do to help them run more efficiently? So that's what this is essentially about.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And now I'll bring Tom in now because I've done a bit of debate. Can I just say that 56 members is still a record then for Lichfield District Council? Yeah.
Can I just say I'm really enjoying this game of pass the microphone?
Yeah, I'm sorry, we're a bit cheap.
No,
mate,
it's
of the
fine. It's
committee.
fine. I'm just a tiny bit crestfallen to realise that I'm not in the Guinness Book of Records as having chaired the longest planning meeting ever at only, I think, 4 hours. To know that someone went on for twice as long as that. But there we go.
There's
I
always
just
tomorrow, Tom. There's always
beg
tomorrow.
pardon. Sorry.
There's always tomorrow.
Yes, there's always another day. First of all, I would just like to give credit to the officers because it has been noticeable in recent months that the planning officers have kept their presentations very concise, and they're all extremely good at filling the 5 or 6 minutes, which they normally take nowadays, with lots of information. As has been pointed out, we all have the reports 10 days before the meeting. We all have ample opportunity to go through those reports and ask questions of officers prior to the meeting as well. So first of all, there's never been a need for a long presentation by officers, and nowadays I do think that they are extremely disciplined, and I'm grateful for that. When it comes to discipline, then maybe this is where the chairman has been falling down a little bit, and I can only apologise for that. The 3 minutes, which has been alluded to, does seem to be a standard with a lot of other authorities. And it's my experience that the objectors and the applicants normally speak for the full time, and they time it extremely well. And I would imagine they have rehearsed their presentations to the second. So if they go from 5 minutes down to 3 minutes, I think all it means is that they would have to edit their reports a little bit more. And that would also go for ward councillors as well. If they were reduced from 10 minutes to 5 or 3 minutes even. The point was made by Claire Booker there that I think Claire's handbag rule complies very much with Parkinson's law, and that is that the speech would expand to fill the available time, just as Claire's knickknacks would expand to fill the relevant handbag. So yeah. And I think also it's very important for all speakers. I've already alluded to the applicants and to the objectors. It's all about preparation. And the professional attitude taken by both sides is noticeable. As I say, they're normally word perfect and to the second as well. And that demonstrates a desire to be as compliant as possible with the rules. And that, I think, makes the meetings very much tighter. Now, there are elements which need to be tightened up, and I'm fully recognizing that fact. And I will take back some of the comments made this evening about chairing the meetings as well. Can I just say that the 2 specific ones up there, which were notable for their longevity, were the care home at Chase Terrace, which locally did inspire an awful lot of local ward ward member comments. It was recommended for approval by the officer, and I think it was refused by planning committee because there was a lot of strength of feeling which was exhibited at that meeting. So that probably explains why that went on for 41 minutes. The one land south of Shortbutts Lane, which was 75 minutes, I know that's an awfully long time. As was pointed out, that was a very lengthy debate, but it was also quite a complex application as well. And I think it would not have done it justice had we tried to curtail the debate a great deal more than that. So discipline, yes, very important. And I take on board the comments which have been made. Thank you very much for that. I think that this has been an interesting exercise. What is very noticeable for me is the last time that we addressed this, and I think that will be about 18 months ago when I think Christy Timms was involved in this process. We were trying to shorten the speakers' times then, and there was a lot of opposition from certain members of this council. I don't take issue with that at all because they're entitled to their opinion, but it would appear to me that, sorry.
Even when they're wrong.
No, I'm not giving an opinion on that at all. What I think is interesting is the consensus which seems to exist around this room today. And I do not take issue with that at all. So I very much welcome this fairly exhaustive process, exhaustive but not exhausting, I would like to add. And thank you very much indeed for asking me along to this evening's overview and scrutiny. Thank you.
No, I appreciate your input on that. I think there's a consensus there, at least on the speakers' times. All the issues have been raised, and officers will take back open. William might be able to make something of it in the minutes. That 3 minutes and 3 minutes is the general view, isn't it? Consensus view, which is what I'm always after if I can get it. Yeah, that's good. Now, strange enough, that's all I've got in the presentation, but I know the site visits is probably the page that's missing. Yeah, 6 out of 7 of these councils that I've got here have site visits. I'd love to hear your views on site visits. There's different sorts of site visits. That's to say, everything's a site visit. Some controversial things are site visits, but I'd be interested in your view on that.
So if I can come in here, that is actually something that I've got in the pipeline.
Yeah,
And it's something that I have been speaking with governance about very recently. So my view is that committee members should undertake an escorted site visit to all items that appear on a committee agenda. And when I say escorted, it would probably be somebody like myself or a senior member of my team doing that. And we can arrange whether we arrive separately or whether we arrange a minibus. That's up for debate at the moment. And then we take members around with plans and explain what they're seeing and explain the main issues within that report. And I think that might go a long way with the debate times as well, whether, you know, there are queries, because we can demystify a lot of things, because seeing things on paper is one thing, but it's not until you see it in real life that you actually get a real feel for what you are seeing, and you can put a very different spin on things. So that is something that we're looking at the moment.
Okay. I mean, it's easier if you've got a council that actually meets in the daytime, the planning committee meetings, and then prior to that, so that's not the case here. So
Yes.
actually, the other thing I did notice, and you may have had a hand in it in the past, the guidance for planning committees, which is actually to take out 1 or 2 or 3 examples of issues that you've looked at as a planning committee, and go back in a year's time and go back and see. Like, you know, I remember I voted for things. Did I vote for that? It didn't look, you know. I know we got computer systems now which can actually give the illusion of something, but sometimes you think, oh, I didn't realise I was voting for that. So are we doing that, or we plan to do that, or would like to do that? You know, either way.
Yes. So as part of the member training as well, that I want to reinforce and get more dates in the diary throughout the year. I want to be able to do that exercise as well and take members out to developments that they've approved at committee and say, this is what you've approved, this is what it looks like in reality. And again, it puts a different perspective, a different spin, different viewpoint on things.
I mean, obviously the idea is to learn for
absolutely, yeah, but it's not just within the district. I mean, I've done it where we've taken members to other areas to see different developments. It kind of just puts a different context on developments across not just Staffordshire, it could be anywhere, to see best practice, worst practice.
Yes.
The good, the bad, and the ugly, as they say.
Can we assume, by the way, in those circumstances, like worst practice, you go discreetly into the other borough? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Sybil, can't you had a hand up?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm just conscious of the fact that there's already a vacancy on planning committee, I believe, that's been extant for several months. So there was a long-standing vacancy. Perhaps it has been filled now, but I say that as a preface to the fact that we're asking a lot of planning committee members if we're asking them to commit time to, you know, reading often very lengthy reports, attending the meetings, and doing site visits. I think site visits are to be commended, but, you know, I just think we need to be conscious of the time commitment of those members. So just a word of caution, really.
Well, I can speak as the former leader of the Labour group. You don't tell your volunteers for planning committee what it's really about. You know, you just anyway. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's right.
Just 2 points, because I think Leona's point, I think, is something worth considering. And you've got to have a political balance on the committee, but the size of it, I think that's a very important point. Yeah, as taking your point, Sue, about the commitment that when you're on plan. And the other thing, Tom, you remember when we considered the Angelcroft, I suggested whether we have a pre-meeting as a planning committee just to sort of narrow down issues. The advice was we couldn't do that because the decision must be made in planning. But I just leave that. What was behind my thinking at the time was that was a really important development for the city, and it was right that this committee was seen to operate in a very organised way. And therefore, we wanted to have a very organised, managed proper debate. No, not prejudging it, but we revised that we shouldn't have any pre-meet. But
yeah, but you could have emailed, presumably, could you, or put those questions early on so that they would be
the thinking was how the actual meeting was going to be run and the points that would be raised to try and filter out the irrelevant points, I guess, and just narrow it down to But
okay. Yeah, if you could come out.
Yes, it's a really good point, Councillor. So there are authorities where I've led on organising pre-meetings where all the members of the committee, it happens usually around an hour before committee starts, where they'll get a run through of the presentations and ask any points of clarification of officers. And it has been deemed that it is not predetermination, it's just points of clarity. It's just like running a chairman's pre-meet, but with all the members there, and that can save a lot of time. So I do advocate that. I think it's a really useful exercise. It is something that I did try and raise when I first started here, and at the time it was we don't do that here, and we're not sure about this, but I'm happy to sort of look at that if members think that there's it has legs and we can take that forward. I'm happy to do that, but I think it is really useful. The thing is that when along with that is the presentations when you go live at committee are actually not the presentations that you see. They're actually even shorter because members will have already seen the plans at the pre-meet, so they're even shorter. And the idea is that everybody has access to all of the plans online, and there is an acknowledgement that you will have had a look at that before entering that committee meeting anyway, so that they can sit hand in hand. You can do it in many different ways.
I remember being concerned in my days when on the planning committee. You get elected, you think, great, I've got better taste than most of you lot, so I'll be able to get all these buildings that are being built changed. And of course, that is not the way it is. There's a presumption that you own some land, you should be able to do what you want on it. And then society comes in and says, well, no, hang on a minute, there are certain rules. But the presumption is always in favour of an application. But I was going to say the situation with I was going to say now, but it was going to be really good. I know it was. But the point, anyway, going back to the point that Councillor Ray made, as a scrutiny committee, we're not wanting to start another debate on this. Is that something that we thought we would say as a committee ought to be taken back to, to officers to have a look at again and see if there would be that pre-meeting thing? So to help the planning committee
I would
itself.
support some exploration of that idea, because if it's if the extra half an hour or whatever, as we have at ONS committees, if that saves 3/4 of an hour or an hour at planning committee, that's all to the good in terms of the efficiency.
Okay, Dave, please.
I think we can potentially go a little bit further than that. There's been some other discussion about other things that we might be able to try. So I think if we can effectively, this committee can go back and say that we should actively look into ways of shortening appropriately shortening the debate, including that. I think that'd be good. That'd be stronger.
Yeah. And what I was going to say was, early days of planning was that, you get a planning application, it's completely against the planning policy, so you've got to throw it out. There's no question about it. But you've got the poor chap or the woman in the gallery who's just inherited this plot of land, and they think they can make a lot of money there, quite properly, but they can't because it's in the green belt. And if people just make a joke and just dismiss it, that's it. So to the public, you think you've dismissed it without looking at all the facts. But of course, we have looked at the facts. So that's the difficulty, is actually getting across to the public that these things are looked at properly. There's some work that goes on beforehand and all the rest of it. But that's just an issue that we're stuck with, I think, rather than can solve or anything like that. So that's great. I appreciate all the input we've had, and I hope that's been very useful for you. And then just if you give up those names who want to increase the 3 minutes, let us know who they are. There's one at the back, I know, but you know. So thank you all very much for that, and I'll move on to the next item there. But obviously you can leave. That's it. That's okay. Okay. Thank you. The next item is in fact just the work. I say just. It's important. The work programme. The Youth Council performance on the 30th of January is in fact will be just a briefing note. But although I'm likely to want a meeting of the presentation on the Youth Council performance at a later stage, we can have a briefing note in January. So that leaves 1, 2, 3. Still got a few items on there. There's the empty homes policy, which will take up some time, I think. Thank you. And then there's the notes from task groups. And then the funding for infrastructure in Birkwood and rural areas, which was mentioned probably at the pre-meeting actually. Medium-term financial strategy and tied up with that financial planning. So it's quite a bit on there for January. My strong advice is not to overindulge at Christmas, although it's the 30th of January. If you want to keep up. Any questions at all on that? Dave, please, yes, and then Paul.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Chair. Just in relation, I mentioned it at the previous meeting as well. We said there was going to be a kind of single task and finish group. I think I'm going to call it wrong.
Task and finish group
on the civic process.
Yes,
and,
that's right,
getting
yeah.
those things done. I'm again looking at this. If we want to get this, we want to get this through before the next civic year, which starts in May, which means it's going to need to go on to that April agenda. Just another plea. Can we try?
I know William's got a plan for it. I can't remember what it is. So he hasn't forgotten it because he keeps reminding me. So can you help with that, William?
No, yes. Similarly, I'm very keen to get this group underway. So obviously, if there are any members interested on constituting this group, that'd be excellent. As we say, the plan hopefully is to get that underway in the spring. Ideally, we'd like its recommendations to be in place, as you mentioned, before the next municipal year begins. If that's not feasible, we'll hopefully get it in the early part of that next municipal year, but that's definitely the aim. And as far as I'm concerned, and with the chair's agreement, that is the focus for the next task group to get up and running, so that we have that ready in time. Yeah,
that's what we talked about. Yeah, it could be the 3rd of April, couldn't it? I think we could try and. Yeah, I know we've got the review of the overview and scrutiny function at the council, but I thought the 3rd of April, because then it is prior to any volunteers to be chair of the council, I suppose. They know what they'll be letting themselves in for. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. To Mike, yeah, I don't know why I'm letting him in, but Mike Wilcox, yes, but the back there. You're not on mic, of course.
On this work programme, I would like to look something about climate change probably in April, or at least where we are in relation to.
Nobody said, yeah, but you see, it's our work programme, you see. And in January there'll be I'm waiting for you. Yeah, I'm waiting for something to happen for the task group to be reported to.
Examine what sort of impact we're making on our carbon reduction plans for the organisation.
Oh, okay. We'll have a briefing note off the cabinet member, so we can then proceed further and know what to do. But I say you're not on mic, so it's a bit unfortunate for everybody watching this or trying to listen to it. Oh, blimey. Dave, Paul, and then Claire.
We do have a climate change task group, which every time it meets can report to this committee. It hasn't met
do something
since the last time we discussed it.
Official.
So potentially, if the cabinet member would like to have something to report, perhaps you should
that's exactly
be pushing to have the task group meet so that we've got notes to discuss at this meeting.
That's exactly it. That's what I try to get across. Thank you for helping me, Paul.
Yeah, I was just going to raise the point that I emailed you about.
I'll come back to you because that's a substantial one. So if we get Claire in first, then back to that
All
one.
right.
Certainly, don't worry, it's on my agenda. My secret agenda.
I was just going to say I would absolutely love the opportunity to publicly scrutinise what's going on with the environment side of things, and would relish that opportunity to dig into what's been happening or not happening and challenge. So thank you.
Essentially, Mike Wilcox, Councillor Wilcox, is not against it. Right, now I'll bring a Paul in because he did have a request. Because there has been a request. There's 2 requests really. There's one from Councillor Henshaw about regarding the rail line between Lichfield and East Staffs, Burton, and then this other one which is also connected, which is transport. We've had the review topic that I've got in front of me from subject scoping document. Paul, please.
Yeah, so what I contacted Steve about and Sue, because we've spoken before about this, is we talked before having a task group looking at transport. And we're looking at various elements and how it works and doesn't work in here, and how we as a district council can improve matters for our residents. So buses, trains, taxis, and having tasks. And I know, Steve, you've raised a very valid point about commitment of councillors. There's no point.
No, it was never counted. It was always officers.
Okay.
To say not their commitment, but enough of them and enough time.
Yeah, no, but also I thought the point you've made also as well before is that if you're going to have a task group, you do need to have actively engaged councillors to make it work. So, and I take that point, and obviously this point was raised. We've raised this in full council as well. So my suggestion is that we put it on the work programme, and what we could do is we'd have a report from officers about transport, and we'd have to narrow it down about how it works, what levers the council has got to improve it through section 106, through planning, through lobbying, so that we can try and improve these transport facilities. We can then, as a group, as a committee, invite bus operators into us, invite Staffordshire Highways, so that we can start putting our point of view and talking to them about the real transport challenges we've got. And then I'm thinking, then, conscious of officer time, but then we refresh that report once every 9 months, something like that. So it's not like a quarterly, it's a quarterly, but it's so that's designed to get it on the agenda, have some specific officer time looking into it, so that we can sort of get to the issues, and then those third parties that are responsible for delivering transport in our area, Staffordshire Highways, Staffordshire County Council, who obviously support the bus services, the bus operators themselves, the train companies, get them in, and then we can challenge them, and we could put our point of view forward. And then the final thing I was just going to say, interesting in members' views, is that I think we could probably narrow off taxis, because I saw in regulatory and licensing that policy is being reviewed, and there's a new policy coming forward in March. And I guess if any of us have got views, we need to be putting those forward. So that was my view, which was a similar topic to what we would propose for a task group, but doing it in a different way.
If we just read the guidance for criteria for selecting scrutiny topics, I'm just picking out some here. Scrutiny can have an impact and add value. The topic is of high local importance and reflects the concerns of local people. The resources are available that would be required to conduct the review in terms of manpower and budget, people power and budgets, hopefully we'd say now. It avoids work duplication elsewhere. And the County Council seat, their Prosperous Overview and Scrutiny Committee on the 6th of July this year looked into this. There's a whole document there which I've read, and we've read it. And emails, I exchange emails. I'm pursuing this for you, don't normally. And when I exchange emails with the senior officer there, is within the Lichfield, this is about buses, within the Lichfield district, we have also used some of the remaining pot to enhance, this is the funding for transport off the government, which is much less than was planned. To use some of the remaining pot to enhance Route 36 between Lichfield, Shenstone and Walsall when it was retendered. There are tenders about to be issued to enhance the current Lichfield local services back to the full loops, as has been requested, and enhance the Saturday bus services. A Sunday service on Route 12E between Lichfield, Fradley and Burton, and other routes across the county. Just explain what this specifically looked at for Lichfield, but obviously looking at it county-wide. And when you get to witnesses, if you've got a task group, witnesses might be happy to come along. I don't know whether you get a bus company coming along as a witness, I have to say, but others may well come along to a task group. They may not want to come here to a public meeting on YouTube and be a witness there. I had it some time ago with police. The police were frit about coming to a committee. The reason being the way they're treated beforehand by the previous chair at the previous meeting. I got that sorted. We had them along there, but that's weird. So it's the logistics there. I would suggest a task group would definitely be a better way of dealing with it. And it's not going off the list. I'm not keeping it on the back burner. We've got the review and scrutiny in January. One of the things I thought about is similar to what I think you were saying there is and not just task group, because there should be task and finish group. And I hope climate change will finish once we've had this big bang from the cabinet member, as it were, in the new year. Then we can have panels where they do keep a monitoring eye on things. But if we're just a lobbying group, that's not what we're about at Scrutiny, is getting evidence together, which the county have got in abundance for buzzes. I don't know how you get train companies along and that sort of thing. But I'm willing to, I would like us to look into it and that, but I think bear with me, look at task group. That would be the better way. I can certainly put a case to the committee next time, but just keep an open mind of that. I'm asking you really through myself as chair.
Yeah. So I just
Yeah, no, please.
Yeah, bear with, but we've been talking about this for a while, and I think it's really important. We all know it's important to our residents, that what you just read out there, Steve, is helpful and useful. But I guess I'm coming at it from the point of a district council. What levers have we got? And I appreciate we haven't got as many levers as the county council have, but what can we do through the planning process? What we can do with our SIL money and our section 106? Yeah. And I'd like for one to be educated on that, and then to be able to sort of play that back to some of the providers of transport in our district.
I think we can get a paper back on that, and actually talking to other officers and getting that information and sharing it with the county. No, so it wouldn't be a briefing paper. Well, it would be a briefing paper, I suppose, but it would be an important paper that you can say, well, yeah, okay, that's where we can make a difference. Go down that particular route or on that particular aspect of it. I don't know whether you'd agree, William. You haven't got to agree, as I've told you. I told you earlier today. I'm going to agree with me too.
No. So yeah, I spoke with some officers here earlier today to identify who would be best placed to put together any sort of report or brief paper on that. You're in the awkward situation where, because the issue itself is a county council matter, the county council officers are the ones that are best placed to actually provide that information. So it's a struggle to get someone here to sort of say, here's what county can do, because it's county that does it. It's county that has that information. So it's about trying to get that engagement with those officers from county council, I think. Obviously, as a committee, it's down to the chair and vice chair, in consultation with myself, if they wish to decide what's the best avenue for that. But for me, at least, that's the fundamental thing, knowing how we can actually get that information to yourselves as members. I think that is something that county council would need to provide rather than district council.
I think that makes sense. It through with officers there, through you as well to the officers. And in fact, the point that was also made to me in the last sentence of the last email I had was as a problem is as well as a well-documented national driver shortage, which means we need to manage growth. So there's a shortage of drivers as well. But those are the sort of information we want or we need, and then we can pursue it further. Sorry, Sue, and then I'll come back. Paul, don't worry.
Yeah, thanks again, Chair. From the information that you've read out from the County Council Scrutiny Committee, it seems to me that we need to be lobbying the county councillors on these particular issues to make sure that our local district voices are heard. And I would suggest that that is very light on officer time. That would be a case of getting the county councillors together in a room and bending their ears about what we think are important priorities for this area, which would not involve briefing notes and so on. So that might be a way forward, if you like, just sort of one-off meeting to say what we feel. That could also include these local health priorities, because it seems that the work programme for the County Scrutiny Committee is a million miles away from where our residents are. And I've come back to the local health priorities task group that I've suggested. You know, again, I think those two items on an agenda for us as an OS committee to meet in private, you know, because then we can be absolutely full and frank and robust about what we're saying to them, about what we think needs to be happening, and then get them to report back to us about what actions they've taken in that respect.
I just want to make the point there for me, which is, if we do have a task group or make some progress on this, is that the best way you can deal with it is to say to the county council or to the county council or anybody, this is the evidence, this is what we've found. So not like, this is my opinion, this is how I feel. It's like, we've got the evidence, and you know, please make note of that. And then it's more difficult to be argued against, and which is what scrutiny is all about, getting that evidence, I think. Dave, I'd like to move on those or soon.
Thanks, Chair. this seems to be, because I know Councillor Rose mentioned kind of section 106 still. I would be very reluctant to see this council using its section 106 for public transport, because actually the county should be putting those section 106 things in there, because they've
Well,
got
that's what we can
highways
look at,
too.
though. That's what,
That's
you know,
where
I don't
they've
want to presuppose anything.
Now, I actually think there are some potential problems with the way that county uses their section 106 powers around that and some other things, but that's a whole other discussion for a whole other day. Particularly in the use of SIL can only be used for capital expenditure. Granted, the definition of infrastructure is actually quite wide in the Act, and about the only time it's ever happened in local government. But it can only be used for capital infrastructure, and placement of capital infrastructure can only come once you've got the evidence base, which the county already holds. Potentially, I think what we would need to use is, rather than try and reinvent the wheel here, because that's just on buses. It's an entirely
It's also
separate
rail as well involved.
situation for rail.
Maybe capital monies could be used there. So I mean, I don't want to have the argument now or the debate now about this, because it's.
I think potentially there may be a way that we could look at something, potentially asking if it can be raised at Staffordshire Leaders Board or through another forum. Because actually one of the things that strikes me is the Health Scrutiny Committee at Staffs has a representative from each of the districts on it. There is a Transport Committee or whatever it's called at Staffs County Council that doesn't have a representative from each of the districts and boroughs. And actually, potentially, could that be a way of squaring this circle and getting those local views put in? Then I strongly suspect there may be better ways of trying to solve this, albeit very important issue that needs to be looked at. But there may be better ways of delivering that than by setting up a task group and investing a lot of our officer support and a lot of our officer basis time in recreating what the county's already got.
I think we could certainly have a paper, but Leona wanted to come in and then. I mean,
So regards to the health side, I have asked the county team if someone could come over to Al. I think that'd be really nice for them to come over, see what we do, and also any items we could also ask them as well at the same time. I've also been asking again regards to the public transport, what Dave had said, that if there was a district rep on the team, I think that's the idea.
Pretty
So,
good.
but I'm just still waiting replies on those
Very good.
items.
thank you. That's useful. Yeah, please, but would like to suggest that.
I suppose the reason I think there's value in this is that I understand lobbying Staffordshire County Council, but part of it is understanding where the challenges are, doing some surveys, getting some data, like the challenges with students getting to college, coming from different parts from villages or across from Birmingham, unreliable bus services, how it works for the elderly, being able to navigate. So if we are then going to, through this, whether it's a task group or an officer report, how are we going to do it? We are then collecting that data. Then we've got some tangible evidence to play back to the funders to say, this is the problem. Here is the quantitative data. Please, can you help us solve it?
We're on the same page. I think that's the thing with scrutiny. If it's to say, well, it's up to you. If you want to be irrational, you carry on. But this is all the evidence we've got. So, no, I'd like to move on. I don't want the county council speaking on this district council committee, as it were. I'm sure you believe you're going to be helpful. I now need to exclude the press and public, although it is only a very tiny bit of the minutes we're going to look at. So I would like to resolve that as publicity would be prejudicial to the public interest by reason of the confidential nature of the business to be transacted, the public and press be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business, which would involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of 12A, schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972.